I'm back. I'm making a video. Here's the situation. It is steaming outside, okay? It's been so hot this summer, and I have the AC on. So I'm unsure if the background noise is going to be too loud. I'm hoping it's not, but so be it, because I'm gonna die. I'm gonna roast to death. And I was cooking and I was using the oven, so this place is an inferno, and it is what it is. So basically, hi, my name's Shanice. Welcome back to my channel, maybe. If you are new, hello. I make very sporadic videos on YouTube. I talk about books. Occasionally I talk about films and music. It has been a long time since my last video. I'm back today to briefly speak about all the books that I have finished since my last video. My reading life has been interesting as of late, but I've been back more into the mood of reading the way I used to, you know, when I was more consistently making videos here. I'll be speaking about 37 books, although in total I did read 42 books. Now those 5 other books I'm just going to name right now. I have been planning a very long video series. I think once I tell you the names of the books, it's going to be pretty obvious what that series is going to be. So those 5 books that I have read that I am not going to speak about at length here are Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, Rage, which is actually written under an alias for this author, and the book that I am currently reading, The Stand. So I don't know why I said I finished 5. I finished 4, and I'm currently reading the 5th one. Dun da da dun, I am reading Stephen King's entire fictional bibliography. I might include the nonfiction as well. There's actually one nonfiction that I am going to talk about in this video because I did finish it and really loved it. But it's not going to be my focus for the video series that I'm planning. It's mainly the fiction, long form, short form. It's going to be a very long series, I imagine. Only on book 5, but it's been interesting so far. So just stay tuned for that series. As for this video, let's just start talking about these 37 books that I did finish. I have my computer next to me. I'll be honest, when I was looking through the list, I hardly remember some of these books, which is not a great sign, but I'm gonna do my best. I did look at my notes because I still have been taking notes on the books that I finished. I'm just gonna try to get back into the mode of talking about books on camera. And I have my iced latte, which turns out to be more half and half than coffee. Let's just get right into it. Pardon me if I am looking off to the side. These are too many books to remember, too many authors to remember, but this is going to be fun. I've separated the books into different categories. The first category of books that I'm going to talk about are the books that ended up being ranked between 1.1 to 2 stars. You might be thinking, well, what about 0 to 1? I guess thankfully none of the books that I finished I rated in that very low category. However, there were some stinkers that did make it into this 1.1 to 2 stars category. So I'm going to be speaking about them with the lowest ranked to the highest ranked within each group. So in this sad little category of 5 books, the first is a reread, and it was actually Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Now, Shanice, why would you read this book again if you didn't really like it the other 2 times that you've read it? Excellent question. The only reason is because I and a friend went to see the play on Broadway, one of these showtimes with Tom Felton, which is really cool. I will maybe insert a video that my friend took at the stage door after the play, and we, you know, were a few feet from Tom Felton. We didn't get to say hi or get anything signed by anyone because I guess we weren't like aggressive enough to make it to the front, but still thought that was pretty cool. Generally a feat for the stage. I mean, we all know this story for this play is not very good. It's just a rehashing of characters and scenes that we did like in the original 7-book series. It boggles my mind that Jack Thorne was one of the co-writers of this play, because he is responsible for Adolescence, one of the best written shows, you know, in the last couple of years. So nuanced, so like sophisticated, and he came up with this. But you know, and also Enola Holmes 3, which was, oof, what is there to say about this one? I ended up giving it 1.5 stars. You know, it could be a little bit fun. Yes, I'm happy about the Slytherin representation from Albus and Scorpius. As a fellow Slytherin, we finally have some decent human beings to root for, but you know, it's unfortunate that this is the biggest representation that we have of good Slytherins. It was a quick reread. Highly recommend seeing the play if you are in New York, and if you are able to see Tom Felton, that would be pretty cool. It's like experiencing the story in a different way. There are some of the technical aspects that I have no idea how they managed to do, like with the time travel portions of the play, I guess, spoiler alert, but the way that they manifested that physically into the stage, that was amazing. And there was a part where there's writing on the walls, like top-notch stage work. But yeah, thumbs down on the story. Next is a novel I barely remember, but I did read shortly after the last video that I posted. The last video I posted was about the International Man Booker Prize for last year, and I did read all of the shortlists, and then I was just still kind of curious about the other options that there were for the prize, because I didn't totally love the winner last year, and so I went on to read a few more of the long-listed books. And this next one, Eurotrash, by Christian Christian Krocht, which is probably not how you pronounce it, but I ended up giving this 2 stars. This is heavily autobiographical. It is from the perspective of an author named Christian, who has written one very famous book called Fatherland, and the writer of the book Eurotrash is also obviously an author who has written a previous novel called Fatherland. So it's very like 2020 autobiography, autofiction, which is a little out of date, but I guess I can't fault the author because I believe this work was just translated into English last year. It didn't actually come out in the original last year, so not the fault of the author. The novel is from this author's perspective. He's middle-aged, he's a little jaded, he's really pretentious and kind of snobbish, and he is traveling through Switzerland with his terminally ill, alcoholic mother, and they have a wad of money, that they're pretty rich people for pretty horrific reasons, I guess, that we later find out in the novel, but they're trying to get rid of some of this money, and they want to go in a taxi and just hand out cash to strangers. This plan obviously doesn't go accordingly. I just kind of thought the book was boring. I hated the perspective of the narrator. I thought he was really distant and cold, which, yes, was partially the point. I didn't really vibe with the tone, the style, the story. The mother was unbearable. Both of the characters just kept talking about traveling to Africa without any specificity. They kept complaining about Qatar and like Dubai, like just not for me. And all of this, of course, was intentional. It's not like an ignorant blindsight of the author, like he's intentionally writing these characters to be very self-centered and like ignorant of the world, but I just was not into reading that. And next up is, what is the next one? Where the Girls Were by Kate Schatz, and this one I gave 2 stars. Here we follow a 17-year-old named Baker. She was valedictorian of her high school class. She's on her way to Stanford. Early on in the novel, this is not a spoiler, but she finds out that she is pregnant. So this is set in the 1960s in San Francisco, and though, you know, it's a liberal kind of haven, there are still taboos on child pregnancies and abortions, and so ultimately what the parents decide is that Baker has to go to a young mother's home which is basically where they sent young mothers in the same condition at that time. They were just like hidden away, and it was a family secret, and people made excuses for where like the young girls were. No one wanted to talk about it. You just went there, had your kid, came back. The child was put up for adoption. Obviously the message was the main point of this novel, and I think that was kind of my biggest problem with it. I didn't feel like the message needed this novel as a vessel. Like, this could have been a podcast, this could have been a documentary. I didn't feel that invested with the story. It was pretty predictable. It's very important to learn about these real stories that young girls and young women had at the time. I don't think this novel did it service like 100%. The next 2-star novel is called Mona by Paula Oloisharak, and this one was originally written in Spanish. I'm just looking at my notes. This follows, unsurprisingly, the main character Mona. She's a Peruvian scholar living in the US in California. She finds out that she's been nominated for this really prestigious award, and so she is sent off to Sweden with the other nominees to kind of be together and compete against each other for this unnamed prize. Now, her other fellow nominees are very male, very sycophantic, like very typical academics. I felt like this was satirical in a way that like The Extinction of Irina Ray by Jennifer Croft was, and also like the first part of 2666 by Bolaño. Just lots of catty academic gossip and backbiting, and Mona is just observing it all, having internal criticisms. Even from her time in the US, is very cognizant of being like the token in a very white cohort, so she understands those microaggressions, whereas her fellow nominees, even though one of them is also Latino, he is not so conscious of these things. He kind of plays into them and perpetuates them. And aside from Mona's astute observations about academia and its issues, she is also dealing with a trauma from her past that has followed her to Sweden, and all of this culminates in like this very surreal last scene. Her internal demons become externalized. The real and the unreal kind of blend together. I really wanted to like this. There are moments of transportive writing, but like other than what happens at the end, the rest of the novel to me was kind of standard MFA fare. I don't think there was much of a plot or much linking things together. It's just that like really interesting last scene, and then it ends. Okay, then the last book in this first tier of books is The Hunter by Tana French. I've been on a Tana French kick lately, so I read all of the Cal Hooper trilogy. This book, The Hunter, is book 2 in that trilogy. I also read another standalone book, which I'll speak about in a little bit, and I'm about to step back into the Dublin Murder Squad series. That one I read Into the Woods, which I loved, The Likeness, which I really loved, and Faithful Place, but I hated Faithful Place. But I'm willing to give it another shot. I did borrow, what is it, Broken Harbor. I borrowed that one from the library. I have it. So hopefully soon I'll re-enter that world and those characters. But I love Tana French. I think she's a brilliant thriller and crime writer, and so I can't really explain much about this novel, unfortunately. It's situated in the very middle of the Cal Hooper trilogy. Cal Hooper is a retired cop from Chicago, I think. He retires and moves to a western rural town in Ireland. He thinks he's going there to finally have some peace, just really distance himself from the crime fighting that he did in the US. Unfortunately though, rural small towns have a way of finding out your secrets, whether you want them to or not, and soon his town finds out that he was a cop, and they ask for his help in solving some things. In this book, again, I can't really mention too much, but a character that is spoken about in book 1 comes back into the town with somebody else, and they are announcing lots of claims of having millions of dollars, which entices the town. Like, people start becoming competitive against each other, and then someone is murdered. That sounds a lot better than what the book ended up being. This was unfortunately kind of a slog. I do want to say this trilogy, if you're someone who wants to read like a whodunit, like Agatha Christie, and participate in the discovery of the murder, this trilogy is really not it. It's much more a study of a small town and how it's changing in contemporary life with advents of like AI and technology, how those types of towns are being left behind and forgotten, and the people there themselves are just kind of ignored by the elite in the country. And oh yeah, towns have secrets, and so these books are more about the characters' lives and the town gossip. There is a criminal underworld that is explored, but I wouldn't say it's like into the woods type of murder mystery. It's not, like, at all. And this was an example of that. Just too much talking, too much of nothing going on, and when it finally did happen, when the murder finally showed up, it was like a character I hated, so I really didn't care if anyone found out who murdered him or her. I'm always going to love French's style of writing and the way she writes about Ireland, the specificity of the people and the towns, but this was just not for me. This next tier, the 2.1 to 3 star range, is where things start to get a little muddy. I'm not going to lie. Most of the books that I read per year fall into this category, or like even up to 3.5 stars. I don't give everything 5 stars. I'm not that kind of reader. I also don't hate everything that I read. Maybe these ratings seem a little jarring, like, oh my god, 2.5, you must have hated that. Not really. That's kind of in the middle of 5 stars, you know. Doesn't mean it's terrible. It just depends. We need context for each. Let's begin at the bottom of this range, and the first is Half His Age by Jeanette Curdy. I have not read her memoir, although I've heard very good things about that. This is a story about Waldo, who is a teenager in high school who falls in love with her kind of awkward, dorky, creative writing teacher, and they develop an affair. Yeah. We're still doing this, I guess. Now, I didn't hate this novel. There's so many videos on YouTube, people like highly offended and they can't believe that McCurdy wrote something like this. Like, calm down. She's obviously not endorsing these kinds of crimes, because that's what they are. She's not. She's exploring this kind of situation through a specific character. That's all she was doing. Let's not read too much into it. And she did say herself that she was inspired to write this by some things that happened to her when she was young. She had like a similarly inappropriate relationship, though that's not a good term for this, but she had that with someone much older when she was younger and in the business. So I think she did a very good job of getting into the mind of a really troubled and delusional young girl. The writing was choppy and like made sense for the voice of Waldo. Waldo is a terrible name. I'm just gonna put that there. Also, the teacher's name, Mr. Corgi, stupid as hell. I don't know why she was just trying to be so quirky with everything. It's unnecessary. Like, I can't take Waldo and Mr. Corgi seriously. Just no. It just kind of deflated. Like, I was expecting so much from this like shocking premise. What you think is gonna happen happens. You know, for a celebrity writing a fiction book, I was impressed with the writing, sure, but it wasn't like the best thing I've ever read. I can tell that McCurdy is at least taking writing seriously. She's not just using this as a cash grab. Where I will say I was disappointed, I went and I watched her episode of Last Meals. She was near the end of the episode, her and the host, they were talking about like their writing, obviously, and flowery prose, purple prose, like really ostentatious writing that can come across as pretentious. and Jeanette McCurdy was saying she never wants to do anything like that, which, you know, is her right as a writer, but it just seemed really dismissive of the fun that language and sentences can be for writers. Like, part of writing is the excitement of like seeing how you can shift words and create new, really shimmering sentences. It's not the priority of every writer on earth, and it's not going to service every character that you write about, but I think if it's a tool that you have, like, why look down on it? Generally speaking, I found it a little dismissive and incurious, which rubbed me the wrong way. The next one is Hunchback by Sao Ichikawa. This was another one of the long-listed International Booker Prize novels that I did not really like, and actually on Goodreads, this is what I wrote. This felt very hollow and unfinished to me. It was more of a collection of disparate reflections on disability with scatterings of quirky, provocative prose, and an ending that's supposed to make the novel seem more profound than it is. This is the kind of book that the publishing world likes to pat itself on the back for publishing. There are interesting things being said about disability in ways that I haven't even recognized myself, like the privilege of physical books and the way that, let's just say, the booktube community like gives a preference for physical books when some people actually don't have access to that. I just felt like this was lacking in story. This is a very sex positive book, but I felt like the erotica scenes were like bordering on like 1Q84 level Murakami nonsense. I felt like it was written over the top and like with such shock value to like prove a point that disabled writers also deserve to write this way and feel this way and, you know, want to have sex and all of this, and fantastic, but I don't know, it just didn't feel like worth it as a story. Like, there just wasn't much there. The next book that I also gave 2.5 stars to is Gods of Want by Ki-Ming Chang. I don't have any recollection of reading this. I'll just be honest with you. I noted that she has a magical way with words. I did put here that she said eyelashes like sickles. Like, that's so descriptive and visual. It's really unique. So on a sentence level, it's really shimmering. Because it was so based on surrealism and traditional folklore, I felt unrooted, like ungrounded, anything goes. So I couldn't find myself in the logic or the non-logic of some of the stories. Two stories did stand out to me, Nuwa and Meals for Mourners, but the rest just kind of, it was just a question mark, like, okay. And I also read Coexistence by Billy Ray Belcourt, another 2.5 stars. I was really, really disappointed by this one because I loved their book, A Minor Chorus. That was one of my favorites of the previous year. This was that novel repeated like 10 times in short story form. Yes, of course, the writing is phenomenal. It is Billy Ray Belcourt after all. It was like they ran out of ideas and were just rehashing the same thing over and over again. So I was really disappointed by this. I guess if you haven't read A Minor Chorus, maybe you'd love this because you'd be enamored with the new ideas that they're writing about, but actually they've written about it already. So I would just say stick to A Minor Chorus and kind of don't bother with this one. Next up is Light in August by William Faulkner. This one was part of my Big Books challenge for last year. This one had the elements of a good and interesting story, but the pacing of Melatonin, it just dragged on. Some people's monologues went on for pages. There were some truly unhinged characters here. There was a pastor that really takes over like the end of the book, and his weird familiar obsession. I'll give it up to Faulkner for, in his day and age, writing from the perspective of a black character, even though this black character is white passing and like, no, it's never really like said what exactly the percentage of his blackness is, but is very slight, you know. But even that was enough to ostracize people, for them to become pariahs in society. So I'll give him the credit for this, and there are, you know, those gothic elements that Faulkner masters and writing about these specific towns, the heat, the summer heat. He's true to the diction of people in this area. Like, you could tell he's a proud Southern man trying to record history, even though the town is fictional. So I really do appreciate that, and the historical significance of this. It just didn't make for an enjoyable reading experience. Okay, next is, I'm a little embarrassed by, because I actually featured it in my favorite books of the previous year. I guess it was 2024, because that was the last one that I did. I reread it and I've changed my mind. So this is Wicked by Gregory Maguire. I think I read it. Did I read it in preparation for Good? I might have. I don't remember, but I just didn't like it that much this time. It's like, it's a little too kooky crazy for me, at least this time. I don't know what mindset I was in the first time I read it that I loved it so much. But there are flaws here. I do want to continue with the series. I have book 2 on my shelves. Maybe I'll do a bookshelf tour now that I've mentioned my shelves, because obviously they're new. I assembled them like last year, so they're not new, but new to you because I haven't been here for a while. Next up, with another 2.5, because that seems to be my favorite rating to give last year, we have The Witch Elm, which I recently finished, like last week. This is a standalone Ton of French book, and it has the kind of vibes of The Likeness, but it isn't that good. Basically, our main character's name is Toby, and for me there are 2 storylines, and Tana French did her best to bring both of them together. One is what happens to Toby near the beginning of the book. He's a victim of a crime, and that then leads to him entering the second storyline, which is his move to his family home, Ivy House. He comes from like wealth. His family's pretty well-to-do. As he will learn, like, not all of his family members had positive experiences, even though they were wealthy, growing up with the kids in their schools. But Toby is like free as can be, really unaware of the extent of his privilege compared to like his more working class friends. So he goes to Ivy House to recover and mentally recuperate from the initial crime that befell him. And so while he's there, and none of this is a spoiler, I think it's in the flap, but while he's there, a skull is discovered in the trunk of a witch elm tree. And before you go thinking this is gonna be like an amazing murder mystery to find out like who the skull belongs to, like, while yes, you do eventually figure out what happened, it's slow. I kind of should have figured that it was gonna be that way when the main characters were not detectives or police officers. This is very much like a social novel about class than it really is about murder. It's like, yeah, a social novel, and there's some crime in it, but really a vehicle for the social commentary. I guess you could say that about anything, but it really drove me crazy in this one. I likened it to The Likeness, another French novel, just because it is set in like this big house with like really privileged, annoying young people, but it is by no means as thrilling and mysterious as The Likeness. I don't know what it is about Tana. It doesn't matter if I don't love her book, I just can't get enough of her. Not the best, but I'm still gonna read this woman. I don't know what to say. I love Tana French. Even though she does wrong, she can still do no wrong. Next up, we're finally at 2.75 stars. We have A Good Animal by Sarah Mauer. It's about a young boy living in rural Michigan. He lives on a sheep farm. His whole family is the sheep farming tradition. And we just follow him falling in love, talking about sheep, breeding the sheep. lots of sheep. I appreciated the authenticity of the environment, the way it's described. I believe the author is also from Upper Peninsula, Michigan. There is an endearing innocence to the main character. It fell apart for me near the end because something happens that I'm not going to say because it's a major spoiler, but something happens to a female character, and I thought it was, the way that it was handled was atrocious. I felt like a character that took advantage of that person and received no accountability for it, or barely any. So while I can appreciate certain parts of like the authenticity and the way that it's talking about class differences and the way rural areas are largely ignored by urbanite centers and stuff like that, that really rubbed me the wrong way. Next up was a short story collection that I read called Sabrina and Karina by Kali Farhado Anstein. Yes, Kali Farhado Anstein, that's her name. I found the style of the writing, the form of the short story here, kind of outdated. Like, it's very traditional. It's like the kind of story that you're taught in an MFA program. It's not as experimental. It's not really changing form that much. Like, it doesn't stray outside of the taught story structure, which isn't a crime, obviously, to each their own, but compared to the other short stories that I've read in my lifetime so far that just do really fun, freeing things, this fell a little flat. Did appreciate the raw storytelling, but part of why I was a little upset was because the raw, gritty nature of like the stories and the plot like didn't match such a traditional way of telling stories. I did note down that standout stories were the titular story, Cheeseman Park, and the best one, Tommy. I thought sometimes the way that the author explored Latinidad was a little too obvious, and it gets a little annoying when seemingly in fiction, like, Latinos only date white people, only talk about white people. Their entire identity crises are surrounded by white folks, which, okay, like, if you live in a majority white town, I'm fine, but like, give me something else. Why do our stories always have to be about like us dating white people and how they don't accept us? Then the last of the under 3 stars, a mess of a book called The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think I like 1Q84 more than this. I mean, I definitely did. I gave it, I think, 3.5 stars. So Toru Okada is the main character. He is unemployed, but he's lucky because his wife makes a decent enough salary that he doesn't really have to worry about the fact that he's not earning an income. I mean, lucky for him. And so what he does without a job is like my dream, right? You read, you learn about the world, you go walking, you go strolling. In typical Murakami fashion, random things start to happen. So like his wife's beloved cat goes missing, so now he's on a quest to find this cat, and then suddenly like his wife goes missing, and then on this quest to find both the cat and his wife, he meets this like teenage girl. What's her name? May is her name. And then Murakami started talking about her breasts, and she's like 17 or something. Like, why are you creepy? Why are you being creepy? And I guess I shouldn't say Murakami, but Toru Okada, the character. But come on. And then it just becomes surreal for like no apparent reason. None of the convoluted segments like really made sense together, other than to elaborate on the fact that like dreams and reality are more connected than we think. We're all connected and all of our lives share similarities. Like, okay, fine. There were stories about zoos and Manchuria and the Soviets, which I couldn't care less about. I feel like this could have been half the length that it was. I also read like a really terrible audiobook of it, no offense to the readers, but they made a character who actually was the detective in 1Q84, Ushikawa. He made a little appearance here. but they made him sound like Wallace Shawn. May sounded like, when I was reading it, before I had started with the audiobook, I needed the audiobook to kind of like pump this up and get through this book a little quicker than I had been. When I was reading May, she was like a very like precocious teenager, quirky, yes, but like centered. And then the audiobook made her fully unhinged. Also, like, the audiobook narrator kept pronouncing metaphor like metaphor. And what was up with the hanging house? No resolution there. It started off okay, and then it blew up. I don't know. This was not for me. I don't know where to go with Murakami moving forward. I did fairly enjoy 1Q84, but his fans seem to not like the book, so I don't know. It's looking a little bleak for me and Murakami. We're still in the same tier, but now these are going to be 3-star books, so these are solid. Not great, not bad. Fine, you might say. Nothing offensive, nothing egregious. Fine. And this is taking a really long time, so let me try to speed this up. So, first is Lucky Breaks by Evgenia Belarusets. I do remember was not exactly what I was expecting. It was hard to place it within a genre because it was sort of nonfiction, sort of journalism, photograph collection, but also kind of fictional. It, I think, is like maybe one of the truest depictions of war that we can have, because you would think there would be a lot more heightened emotion from these like real perspectives of people living in the Donbass region during this current Russian-Ukraine war. But actually, the people are just continuing with their daily lives. War might be happening outside of your home, but you have to keep on living. So it was harrowing in that way, and it does make you think about news and the information that you are given, because there are photographs interspersed within like the different segments. There are like a lot of, it's a short story collection, but it's not. So each of like the short fragments have pictures in them, but the pictures are like unrelated to the story. The stories themselves are choppy and fragmented, they digress. Yeah, it just gives you like a real look at what it might be like during wartime, which is frightening because of how kind of banal everything is. But I'll be honest, my attention sometimes waned in and out because the pieces were so short, hard to just really sink myself into it. And then it's The 10-Year Affair by Erin Summers. Two married people begin an affair which lasts 10 years, and then they break it off. That's what the novel is about. It was solid writing. I liked the gimmick of looking at what a life could have been had a character chosen this route versus this route, and like the fantasy route is always more interesting than the real route that the character took. You know, enjoyable, but kind of forgettable in the end. A solid book. Next up is her first Palestinian, a short story collection by Said Tibi. I wasn't wowed by the collection, but I wanted to read it because I wanted more Palestinian stories in my reading life, and I did appreciate this book for giving me those perspectives, specifically Palestinian Canadians and their individual plights, looking at them engaging in activism, gaining self-confidence, also questions of identity, of course. I just wasn't like that wowed by it. It's inoffensive, you do learn some things, but it's kind of middle of the road for me in terms of short story collections. Okay, next is Defectors by Paula Ramos. This is a nonfiction. I've had it on my shelves since 2024, and it was a little too soon to read it, but I just decided, let me just pick this up. This is from a journalist, so it takes a really careful analytical look at some of the reasons why Latinos are joining the far right. It came out, like, I think during the 2024 election cycle, which obviously meant that it was in production for a long time before that. So the author was clearly observant enough to notice the shift in the demographics of certain voting blocks before like the rest of us were. Here she analyzes how religion plays a big role in that, how masculinity obviously plays a huge role in that, how racism and internalized racism plays a big part of that. The disappointment for me though, and I'm conflicted because the author acknowledges Afro-Latinos, but her language throughout doesn't always. She has a section specifically for an Afro-Latino Dominican woman who voted for Trump and like does not really consider herself black. What a surprise. And so the author does take some time to explore that confounding identity, why that might be that some people just have such a contorted view of themselves and their roots. She does do that, but then in like the other chapters, they're kind of largely forgotten. It's like, oh crap, I have to like mention the Afro-Latinos, what do I do? Let me put this chapter in here. But then the language in the other chapters largely talk about like indigenous European mixed Latinos. Like the Afro-Latinos are like not really mentioned. But that doesn't take away from like the expert research that Ramos did. It was an engaging book. I was just, you know, a little disappointed on the consistency of the language when referring to Latinos. The First Bad Man by Miranda July is the next book. These are all 3 stars. I think I mentioned that already. This is now the 3-star block. I would be really interested to live in Miranda July's head for a day. Like, where does she get these ideas from? This one was a little too quirky for me. I always leave a Miranda July book feeling more inspired to write in an uninhibited way, to just write whatever comes out. And figure out the story later. Just get it all down. And she seems to be unafraid of doing that. So this was her first novel. I had read all 4s 2 years ago, I guess, and her brilliant short story collection. And so I'm itching to read everything that she writes. So I can check this off, but I would not say it's as good or even better than all 4s, or even, it doesn't even come close to the short story collection. Next is All of This Could Be Different by Sarah Duncan Matthews. Here we follow a character named Sneha who lives in Minnesota and gets a new corporate job, and she's suddenly like able to pay bills and like live on her own. She's queer, so she's like exploring dating women now. Another book where the person of color is like only talking about white people. She does have black friends, but she like largely dismisses them, I feel like. The writing is sharp, and it does touch on the recession in 2008 because it was the setting is around that time. And our main character is affected by that and is now trying to figure out what to do. And it talks about like class privilege and class differences. Yeah, so interesting topics, kind of insufferable characters. Then another nonfiction that I finished, The New Czar by Stephen Lee Myers. This was very dry, as to be expected. The writer is a journalist focused on Russian-centric stories. That's his beat, that's his area of expertise. So he writes this in a very like academic, scholarly way. So like sentences with 3 references, 3 different quotations. It's well researched. He tries his best to be as impartial as possible, and he did that. There were some parts where he kind of funnily was a little petty, like mentioning Putin's receding hairline and his alleged cosmetic procedures. The unfortunate thing for Stephen Lee Myers, as great of a writer as he is that Putin is boring, right? He likes studying German, he likes working out, he likes power, and he likes dismissing the women in his life. It's a dry book based on a dry man. On a serious note though, this is, I think, a really good look at a supremely flawed man. It's not just like he's 100% bad. Like, it does actually bring up the uncomfortable truth that like he came up with policies that some Russian people do like, and that did some good. The arrogance and the dangerous arrogance of Putin thinking that he is the only one who can save Russia, and that democracy inherently brings about corruption. Like, the irony of that, you know? Like, do away with democracy because people are stupid and they're gonna vote in bad leaders. And like, trust me, you would think that me as an American who hates the administration would agree with that, but like, no, my friend, you need democracy. So it was really fascinating. I learned a lot from this book, but again, Putin is uninteresting as like a human being. So like, a lot of just his life is so regimented. He likes rules, he likes power, he's a little obsessive. That's it. All right, then we have The Keeper. I've been talking for too long. I need to hurry this up. So The Keeper, Tana French, book 3 of the Cal Hooper trilogy. I feel like Tana French saw the criticisms of book 2, The Hunter, and was like, okay, I gotta redeem myself. And she, for the most part, did. I just think that this series as a whole, like, had a limit, like, had a low ceiling. It did kind of everything it needed to do, I feel like, already by this point. So this was just kind of more of the same. Like, the mystery is a lot more interesting than the previous 2 books. Basically, Cal Hooper, again, is the main character, and in his town, a young woman is discovered in a river, or like in a marshy area. Unwillingly, he is brought into the search and investigation. And so that starts from the beginning. So I did appreciate that improvement, or return to form, I guess. I felt like I'm glad that this was the last book, because this series is kind of run out of steam at this point. So it was, you know, enjoyable for the most part, and I guess coming off of a book that I didn't think was that great in The Hunter, it was already expected improvement. Next up is Private Citizens by Tony Tulatmuti, and this is considered like the first millennial novel. It's similar to All of This, or All This Could Be Different by Sarah Thunkam Matthews, just a lot more verbose. I think the redeeming factor of this book, and like the most unforgettable, most delicious part of it, is the writing. Tulatmuti is incredible. He's like the kind of writer I'm jealous of. Like, I wish I could come up with these kinds of sentences. Similarly looks at young people figuring it out during the first recession, 2008 recession. You know, the characters are unbearable, a bit insufferable, but intentionally so. But I'd say read this just for the writing. Last in this tier, finally, is The Searcher, book 1 of the Cal Hooper trilogy. This was my favorite one because I still had a lot of hope when I was reading it, and it just set everything up really beautifully. Like I mentioned before, Cal Hooper is an ex-cop from Chicago, although written a little unconvincingly, but he moves to Ireland to start a new peaceful retirement, and then he's not allowed to because people find out that he's an ex-cop, and they need his help solving crimes. So yeah, a child approaches him in this book about their missing brother, and they enlist Cal Hooper's help and expertise in finding their brother. And then it goes off from there. But I really liked the setup. I loved being in this city, this town. I felt like it was so real to me. I could feel and see the fog. Very visceral, very engaging. Not the most like incredible new original mystery or anything, but it was nice to be like welcomed back into Tana French's world. We have now approached the last tier of books, the 3.1 to 4 star books. So kind of my favorite, not just of last year, because some of these I've read this year, but these are the top of the top. Let's just quickly get through these because this has been a long enough video. First up at 3.5 stars is Neighbors by Diane Oliver. This was part of my short story collections choices of last year. This is set in the Jim Crow South, and it does something interesting in that these heroic stories of African Americans like enduring all this vitriol during that time. This reminds us that like they were just human beings, and these were deep traumatic moments in their lives, but their lives, their regular day-to-day lives still went on. So a lot of these are analyzing these more quotidian moments, and the weight of like being forced to be like an activist for good, even though it's not your responsibility. Society should have figured this out a much long time ago, but it's like that weight and the depth of how it affects your daily life. So I thought this was really wonderfully done, and it's really tragic that the writer died so young that we can't get more of her fantastic and really nuanced stories. Next up, also at 3.5 stars, is Miss Kim Knows and Other Stories by Cho Nam-ju. These were stories about Korean women of all ages. I thought the titular story in particular was standout because it took a look at misogyny, but also like just the intensity of work culture in Korea. I thought the writing was really deft and smart, but also funny. There were some time jumps in here. I'm now like more interested in reading Kim Ji-yoon. I also reread Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte in preparation for the adaptation that came out earlier this year, which I actually kind of liked. I know it received a lot of hate, but I enjoyed myself. I enjoyed this book too. The first time I read it, I absolutely despised it and I gave it like 1 star. I think this time I just appreciated it more for its gothic nature. It's like overwhelming dramatic emotions. It's an extreme romance, and I have to say it has not been perfectly adapted to the screen. Like, I've seen the version with Ralph Fiennes. That was horrible. The Tom Hardy one was better, despite the off kind of chemistry and the weird casting in the current one, the one that Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi are in. Despite its flaws, like, I actually felt the most for the couple in this edition, which is crazy. But I felt more like sadness for them in this edition. This is like a perfect rainy day kind of book. I started reading it during the first blizzard earlier this year, and it was like the perfect setting for it. So atmosphere and environment definitely do play a role in how you enjoy the book you're reading. Next is another 3.5 stars. This is Enter Ghost by Isabella Hamad. This was another important choice for me because, one, it just sounded like something I would want to read, but also prioritizing Palestinian stories. I thought the writing was so accomplished, so intelligent, so topical, so aware, so empathetic. I loved how Hamad, she included the themes of Hamlet within the story itself, not just in the plot, where a group of Palestinian actors are preparing to put on their version of Hamlet, and the main themes that the book explores, not just Hamlet, but Hamlet within this novel: identity, selfhood, the body politic, family, nationhood. She just does such a brilliant job with this. This gives you a really honest and necessary look at the lives of people living in the West Bank under Israeli occupation, the exhaustion, but the fire and the pride that Palestinians have about their culture, their people. It really also gives importance to art and how it helps people deal with the eternal suffering surrounding us. So yeah, I just thought this was definitely done, a unique story, and also, like, having studied Arabic, it was really nice to hear that the audiobook narrator spoke Arabic and like Palestinian dialects, so I can hear like the words that I used to know when I was studying it. It was a little bit familiar to me, so yeah, just a really harrowing but rewarding reading experience. I also finished Yesteryear by Carol Claire Burke. I'm surprised I like this because this is, big on social media, and I was just kind of expecting to hate it, but I was pleasantly surprised. There were some people I could think of gifting this book to in my life. I'm sure you know what this is about. A trad wife influencer who finds herself traveling in time, maybe sort of, to the pioneer days that basically embody the reality of the world that she is like posting and bragging about on social media. Like, do you really believe these things, miss? Let's see how you deal with living this way for real. And this like really annihilates social media and performative lifestyles very well, in a funny way, but in a sympathetic way too. It gives you reasons for maybe why people act this way and the pressures that make them jump to these kinds of lifestyles and careers. I thought it was fairly done. I thought it was funny. This was actually a pleasure to read. As was Leave Your Mess at Home by Tolani Akinola. Amazing book. Amazing book. So this is about a dysfunctional family. 4 siblings take the center of the story. Anjula, Sola, Ola, and Karen. These are Nigerian American young people living in Chicago. Anjola is fresh off her Yale graduation. She's now a resident at a hospital in the South Side. And so she comes back. Around this time, so does her sister Sola, who up to this point had been living in California as an influencer. Things went wrong and she's forced to come back home. The 4 siblings have been disconnected for a long time, and so Sola's return kind of forces them all together, and it all culminates in a Thanksgiving dinner. This is so funny. This is so specific in its depiction of Chicago. Unlike Mr. Cal Hooper in the Ton of French books, this is the real Chicago. Like, you could tell that this author lives there. We went to the same university, so some of the locations that she wrote about like are accurate. So this is a true depiction of Chicago. This is really rich in its exploration of immigration, of identity, of misogyny, of religion, of the different ways that first-generation Americans have to contend with their nebulous identity and way of life. There's not a corner of intersection that Akinola misses. Highly, highly, highly recommend. I think Akinola is a fresh voice, and I can't wait to read everything that she writes. Next up is New Grub Street by George Gissing. This was a shock for me. I honestly kind of expected it to be very boring, but it hit me right where I needed to. Seems like Gissing and I have similar concerns, struggles, anxieties, depressions, etc. Specifically when it comes to the profession of writing and art as a career, sacrificing art for business, keeping the integrity of art of the creative process. So Edward Reardon kind of exemplifies the earnestness and the maybe naivete of somebody who wants to keep their integrity and dignity in pursuing a writing career, and his life is contrasted with Jasper Milvain, which is like the most evil sounding name ever, who is a successful writer who has chosen to follow the money and then worry about integrity later. And I think both are like pretty balanced and fairly explored in the novel. This is about people trying to accomplish their dreams. Some are failing to do so. Some have failed and have given up and now have become really miserable people. Some haven't been given a chance to, but still find the positive in life. It's not the most like traditionally uplifting story, but it did a lot for me. I did think after volume 1 it lost a little bit of focus. Like, there's not a plot, it's really just following these disparate characters as they try to follow their dreams. But I was really invested in the characters and their points of view. And Edward especially, his ending is really tragic, but like a really honest and like surprisingly modern view of, I'm not going to say what, but whatever happens to him. For that to have been written about during this time, I think is pretty daring. Next is Sky Daddy by Kate Folk. I love these weird literary fiction books. I feel like Kate Folk and Miranda July would have an interesting conversation together. This is about a woman who is sexually attracted to planes. There's humor in the fact that the book doesn't really explain the jump. Like, you can tell that this obsession stems from trauma, but like you don't really get to understand like how did it go from 0 to 100. Like, where's the connection? How does this character feel like she has to have a relationship with a plane to feel good? The people in the narrator's life, her name is Linda, by the way, the people in Linda's life are all telling her like, you have a problem, and she's just like, they just like don't get me. So there's a lot of humor in her obliviousness to the situation. In my notes, I actually wrote, I think I'm in the perfect state of depression and unfulfillment that this really impacted me. So I guess if you too are depressed, this is your book. Okay, So my battery ran out because I was yapping for so long, and I don't feel like waiting for it to charge. So I'm just going to finish this on my phone. Apologies for the new video quality, but here we go. We have 4 more books to talk about. So Small Rain by Garth Greenwell is next, and this one I gave 4 stars to. Sky Daddy, by the way, I gave 3.75 to 4 stars. All of these things are arbitrary. Like, none of the ratings actually mean anything. But anyway, so Small Rain by Garth Greenwell has, to be expected poetry and insight and observation. I think Garth Greenwell is like a premier prose writer, one of the best, and this one is no different. This is a COVID story, which had me a little nervous when I first started to read it, but I was in good hands. A man comes in with a really rare aortic mishap, which is like a terrible way of describing it, but he has an incident that's very rare for people his age. And so he goes to the hospital during COVID, and it's like, if you like The Pit and the way that it explores human connections and the positives and the negatives of the healthcare industry, I think you'd like this. It was sure to point out like the more negligent healthcare workers, but also the hard work that most of them put into helping people and securing their well-being. I highlighted so many sentences. Garth Greenwell, like I said, is just a master of his craft. And then here's the other Stephen King book, the nonfiction, that I'm not going to talk about in that project that I mentioned. I finished On Writing. I needed a dose of inspiration, and I've heard nothing but great things about this book. I was a little hesitant just because some Stephen King that I have read in the past has not been my favorite, like Pet Sematary. But again, like, this has just overwhelmingly positive reviews, and I can see why. Like, I really, really admire Stephen King, his humility, upbringing, how he approaches writing. I admire his work ethic. I liked that in this book he actually gave practical advice, like different assignments. Like, okay, here's what I think you should do. Now step away from the book and do this and come back to the book, and let's see how you improved. I really liked that. It's necessary sometimes. And I loved his writing style. He shouldn't be dismissed as like some genre plot-driven writer. Yes, he's a master of that, but he's also an excellent prose writer. So I think this just showcased all of that and the passion that he has, and again, like, his humble background. That's really important. In a world of nepotism, it's very nice to see that you can actually make it coming from a working class background. Okay, then Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is next. It's a reread. I first read it, I think, in college for myself, not for a course or anything, and I gave it 5 stars. It was and still is one of my favorite books. This time I gave it just a little bit under the 5 stars, but still a book that I think everybody should read. It is so immersive. Like, because it had been such a long time since I had first read it, I had forgotten a lot of characters and parts of the story. It is immersive. It's gripping. Like, it's really an unputdownable book. People say that it's hard to read, like the language is dense. I frankly don't find that. I guess I'm lucky in that way. I still need to read Paradise Lost, just because, this book is so tied to Paradise Lost. And what's funny is I read this in preparation for watching the Guillermo del Toro film. Still have not watched it. Have not watched it at all. And finally, the last book that I'm going to talk about in this video, thank God, because my voice is shot. The top book that I have read since my last video on YouTube is Rejection by Tony Tolatamuti. Finally, I read this book. These are interconnected short stories, and they all deal with the way that certain characters treat rejection, whether from other people, against themselves, their family. This is unhinged, truly unhinged, in a book of its time. It is metafictional. It's so Tolatamuti. It ends with a letter to Tolatamuti from, like, his editors. The author is very aware of what you might be thinking as you're reading it, which can be annoying to some people, but I just think it's brilliant. I think it makes for an interesting read with Defectors, the nonfiction book that I talked about. Just this rise of the manosphere, even that documentary on Netflix by Louis Theroux, just an exploration of men and young boys in our society and how they're adopting misogyny as a result sometimes of rejection. But it's not just men. Women are also central characters to these stories here. I just think it's well-rounded, it's funny, it's astute. One of the most creative things I've read ever. My favorite of the year. Not 5 stars. I'm picky, I guess, but up there. Let's see if something else this year gets to this level. I am going to stop now because really my voice is done. I will see you next time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and yeah, have a good one. I'll see you next time. Bye.